Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's get right into this thing.
I mean, that's what it's all about tonight. Yeah.
Hard to follow up Hannah, but I'll try my best.
All right. Bring it in. Jesse, kind of you can back yourself down on the low post or something, I guess. Well, Marcus Freeman, after Saturday's win over number 24 Navy, was asked how big the win was for the Irish. So here is the answer from the Notre Dame head coach.
I think that's for you all to tell us what type of win that was. For us, man, we achieved the outcome we wanted, right? And that's ability to celebrate in that locker room. There's always room to improvement. I'm not satisfied. Nobody's in that locker room satisfied. We're greedy. We want more. We want perfection. And so we let others tell us what type of win that was. We're going to celebrate it because a lot of people in that room put in a lot of work to achieve that. So we got to celebrate it. That's the outcome that we aspire to have. But then we also go back to work and we really attack some of the deficiencies that we have, and we attack some of those areas that we've done well in. But I'll let somebody else do the description of what type of victory that was.
So Marcus Freeman wouldn't say how big the win was. How big do you think it was, Jess?
I believe the win on a national level was pretty significant because we saw Notre Dame climb in the polls. So it feels like it rubbed people or kind of swayed people the right way or gave them some kind of validation since that Northern Illinois loss. But to be honest with you, as a fan, I don't think it was that huge of a win because it was what needed to be done. My final score prediction was 31-13. I took Notre Dame to win by 20 plus in an alternate spread over the weekend. And anyone that asked me or came up to me over the weekend said, "Oh, Navy, that's a good team. They're going to give you a run for your money." I said, Notre Dame's going to win by 20. You know, as long as Notre Dame executed and did what they were supposed to, I had every confidence that they were going to win this game. I think it was more so kind of the outside perspective and what this game did for, you know, maybe outside of the Notre Dame circle. But I have to agree with Marcus Freeman. You know, you are 1-0 on the week. You're now going into your bye, and you have the rest of the season to finish to kind of hit your ultimate goals, right? And this game or this win doesn't matter if you go out and lose to Virginia or to USC or to Florida State. So, again, I don't think this win was that huge by any means, but it was nice to see them take care of business and kind of maybe, you know, put to bed or put to rest some of the doubts that a lot of people had on Notre Dame since the Northern Illinois loss.
I think that was important because it was fairly split. Like I've seen people saying, well, everybody was picking against Notre Dame. Not everybody was picking against Notre Dame. There were people picking against Notre Dame. Don't get me wrong, but not everybody was picking against Notre Dame. You know, again, like I went back and watched the college game day, and you know, the only guys who were picking Navy were Schwarber, you know, the guest picker, and Pat McAfee. And Desmond Howard, Kirk Herbstreit, Nick Saban, the people who matter on that panel the most were all picking Notre Dame. But I think that I agree with what Anthony is saying here. The 54-14 final, I think that is what matters the most because Notre Dame caught a break in the fact that Navy was undefeated and ranked coming into this game. So that gives them another data point to build that resume. And they just went out there and shellacked Navy. And, you know, again, like you can talk about, well, Navy made all these mistakes, and some people have decided to go that route as well. You know, like, you know, it wasn't about Notre Dame, you know, pummeling them. It was, you know, it was more about Navy giving the ball away and those kind of things. Fair, but Notre Dame still had to capitalize. They still had to turn those into points. And they turned it into 51 points, so it wasn't like they just squeaked by Navy. So I think that it was really important that they were able to do that. But I also like how Marcus Freeman downplayed it because, you know, if he comes out and he's like, oh, it's huge and this and that, like it would have been much bigger for Navy. And I think that played into the fact that they made so many mistakes. But Marcus Freeman had to downplay it. Now you go into a bye. You've got 4 games left, but, you know, just like any coach will tell you, you got to approach this thing week to week because you just don't want to fall into those traps again. So from a coaching standpoint, you couldn't build it up too much.
So correct me if I'm wrong. They ended up with 5 turnovers and 1 muffed punt, right? So 6 total turnovers.
2 muffed punts. Well, I think one might have officially been. One was a muff. Two, the second was more like a true fumble. I think.
So
I think
like 4 offensive turnovers between fumbles and interceptions, and 2 special teams turnovers. So
yeah,
here's what I'll have to say. That's a big reason why that score ended up to be 51-14, right? Like Navy simply just doesn't turn the ball over, and Notre Dame forced them to turn the ball over 6 times. And like you said, they capitalized off of those turnovers. But I see a lot of people maybe kind of questioning or doubting. Notre Dame didn't really do much on the fumbles, the offensive fumbles, right, to contribute, right? It was a lot of kind of like quarterback and running back mishandling of the ball. But I guess what I'm getting at for those kind of, maybe if you're looking at it with that mindset, is Notre Dame still forced them into turnovers, even if they didn't physically contact them or force them. Because what happens when you're playing a team like Notre Dame, that is their speed and their length to get downhill so quick puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And so while, it might not be a hit that caused the fumble, but just the presence alone and the quarterback and the fullback feeling the pressure of Notre Dame's speed, athleticism, and length, coming downhill, that plays a factor in Navy turning the ball over. And that's something that they hadn't faced yet, right? A defense
no, exactly. I think they were overwhelmed by that. Yeah, because they hadn't seen anything like that.
So again, even though it's on the stat sheet, it shows, yes, their turnovers, and again, we want to see those big hits that cause turnovers, not just a fumble on the exchange or what it might be. But still, I think Notre Dame's just overall presence and kind of suffocation as a defense as whole can really get into a quarterback's head at the end of the day, and especially when you're already down 14-0, 21-0, and you really feel like you have to kind of make up the difference. I just think it added a lot of pressure to Navy, and they just kind of cracked.
DK says Desmond matters. I mean, obviously, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you probably don't think Desmond Howard's opinion matters that much, but he is on the most prominent college football show that there has ever been. And he has been on there for several years now. So you might not like his opinion, but yeah, the fact that he has that platform and he's on that show, his opinion, now again, making picks doesn't determine the outcome of the game. That's why, like to get too wrapped up in who picked, you to win, who picked you to lose and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much because they're mostly just out there, playing it up and having fun with it. Yeah, that's right. But
I think the biggest, what I would say, win that came out of this weekend was a continued development of Riley Leonard's passing game. I thought he made some really nice downfield throws. I thought he had a nice touchdown to Chris Mitchell. He had another nice touchdown, I believe, to Bo Collins. But really the one play that stood out to me, and it was on the first drive of the game, was that big completion to Jaden Greathouse across the middle on the post route. I think that was 3rd down, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so to get to that's what I need to see going forward, is because as Notre Dame's opponents, intensify, and this whole end goal is to make the playoff and to win in the playoff. Well, in the playoff, you have to pick up big third downs like that when the running game isn't necessarily open, right? And so to see him continue a drive and hit a big play with confidence to Jaden Greathouse early in the game, and then can kind of continue on, building on that passing and moving the ball downfield. I really liked what I saw in that. And that's what's going to win them games down the road, is the ability to use the passing game to kind of dig them out of the hole when they need it.
Led me right into our next topic. It is Riley Leonard. We've got some comments from him. He was asked about some of the former Notre Dame quarterbacks that he's talked to since he's been at Notre Dame.
I've probably talked to maybe five now throughout my time being here. It's awesome. Every single one of them, has brought me down to earth. Everybody thinks of Notre Dame as just this powerhouse, and I was a little overwhelmed whenever I first committed. But then once you get in here and start meeting these guys, like, they're just normal dudes just like me. And every single one of them just told me, like, don't take it for granted and don't have any regrets. Like, I talk about it a lot, but, I think regret only comes from missed opportunities, not failed opportunities. So, like, if you want to throw it and you don't throw it and let it rip, like, you're going to regret that. But if you throw it and something bad happens, it is what it is. At least you gave it a shot. And every single one of them, told me that, along the lines, and, really just find myself, find my peace. And it's a huge honor, to put on this blue and gold. And every day I wake up, I really live by that. And, whether things go great, things go bad, I'm waking up every day, and I'm not taking it for granted.
So I've got a couple different directions we will go with this. Anything stand out to what you heard him say there?
Yeah, the first thing that stands out is I liked his kind of mentality on, having regrets, essentially, at the end of the day. I would rather have a regret of doing something and regretting the outcome than not doing it and then regretting ever not doing it, basically being scared to do it at the end of the day. So I really enjoyed that mindset, especially at the quarterback level, because the quarterback isn't going to be perfect, right? Like he's going to throw an interception, or he might take a bad sack, or, a fumble or whatever it might be. But I would rather my quarterback go for it all. And given the circumstance.
So you want a gunslinger is what you're saying?
I want a responsible gunslinger, right? But I don't want, I would rather have that than someone who is just conservatively kind of too scared to kind of attack, right? And I think that's the mindset that I'm looking for. Is I don't want you to be scared to attack and what the potential outcome would be. I would rather you rip the thing, and then it's like the old analogy. I remember you told me this a long time ago when I was growing up. You never ask for forgiveness, or it has to do with
don't ask permission, beg for forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly, and it falls along those kind of same lines, essentially, right? Like.
I didn't realize how young you were when I told you that.
But it goes, it falls along those same lines, and that's what I guess stuck out to the most to me from listening to Riley Leonard.
So fill in the blank. Leonard's approach right now is blank.
Leonard's approach right now is methodical, I think, is the best way to describe it, because I think he realized, that there are methods to kind of the madness, and especially when you're playing quarterback at Notre Dame and you're coming off of, you're transferring in, and this is your only season that you're going to play quarterback at Notre Dame, and you're coming off the injury and sort of that stuff, and then you add the new offensive coordinator. So I feel like it's very methodical how Riley Leonard has moved through this process of kind of, coming off injury, being a first-time quarterback at Notre Dame, working with the new offensive coordinator, and some of those struggles that he went through early, right? Because everything obviously wasn't clicking, game one, game two, game three, but he methodically kind of progressed through things. And I think we're seeing almost the best version of Riley Leonard to this point.
Methodical is interesting because that almost, I don't want to say it's conservative, but it skews more toward conservative, I think. What I went with is confident, like he's just playing. And I think that's the biggest thing for him. And I think it's one of the more important things, in sports. There's this David Ortiz quote from his prime that I know you're familiar with. It starts with confidence, because if you go in thinking you might not get it done, you're already out. I'm basically paraphrasing it a little bit, but like the biggest progression I think that Leonard has made over the 8 games of the season is just the confidence that he plays with, because he's still not perfect. It's like not every star is aligned, and he's not out there playing perfect football, but he is just more confident in the way he's playing it. Just like the Georgia Tech interception, for example, because like he was talking about letting it rip and not have any regrets about it. Well, he let the Georgia Tech, ball go, and maybe like if things had turned out differently, he might have a different kind of regret about it. But he'd repped it, he'd practiced it. There was just more tentativeness, more hesitancy in his play early on, and I think that he has worked through a lot of that. So confidence is what I'm going with for how I think that he's playing right now. Facilitate, inform says dialed in, and I think that is another good one. I think he's pretty locked in, and again, just confident in what he's doing. He, like he knows just because you drop back to throw doesn't mean that, he's not going to force a ball. He's not going to force a bad ball, just because the initial play was designed to be a pass play. You see him drop back, and if it's not there, he knows that he can take off running as well. But he's also not in that Ian Book category where it's like 1,001, 1,000. Oh, no, I'm ejecting out of the pocket because I'm feeling a little bit of pressure. He's patient enough to go through those progressions, but he's not rushing his progressions, and he knows that he can still, get out of there with his legs, and just an elite runner. So I think he's just confident. He just appears to be so much more confident in everything that he's done. So going back to what he was talking about, talking to former Notre Dame quarterbacks, if you could pick a former Notre Dame quarterback for him to talk to, who would it be?
The person I would pick, I'm sure he's already reached out to, because I feel like they have a close relationship with Notre Dame for many reasons, but it would have to be Brady Quinn. I think Brady Quinn was the most successful quarterback. He has a tremendous amount of knowledge, still continuing to be around the game. He was a part of, an NFL roster for a good amount of years, but when you're talking about someone who is still kind of in touch with, Notre Dame football, it's still relevant. It was, in the early 2000s. So Brady Quinn would be my ultimate answer.
Henry and Scooby mixing it up in Jesse's living room.
We left the windows open for some reason, so now they just hear everything that's
all
going
the
on
squirrels.
outside.
Yes. I mean, Brady Quinn's my answer as well. Maybe it's too easy, and like he did when I was listening back to the recording of him talking, like he rattled off a few. Ron Paulus is one. Tyler Buckner is a guy he's talked about. Sam Hartman is an obvious one. I'm not sure who the other guys exactly were. I mean, Brady Quinn just makes so much sense. I mean, especially like just in terms of the modern quarterbacks, he's been through it all.
That's what I mean.
I mean, he went through a quarterback competition, with Carlisle Holiday back in the day, came out on top on that. He played under a huge, like in terms of like the modern spotlight, it was still a little bit pre-social media, so it wasn't quite to that extent, but like just that whole 2005, 2006 era with him and Samardzija and Zibikowski and, playing in back-to-back BCS bowls and all that kind of stuff. He thrived in that spotlight. He was a first-round draft pick and all those different things. And obviously he thrives in the spotlight being on TV and his own radio show and all that stuff right now. So Quinn, I think, just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, when you combine, success, relevance, it's still within a 20-year period. And again, someone who is constantly dialed into modern day college football, right? Like they have an understanding of how the game has evolved, what
he's analyzing it every week.
He's got the current landscape. And then on top of all of it, he understands the dynamics of Notre Dame because he's created like that NIL, trust or fund or whatever you want to call it at Notre Dame. And so again, I think he just understands the landscape of things at so many levels, what it's like to be at Notre Dame, what it's like to analyze the rest of college football, what it means to make it to the pros, managing expectations, all of the you can go down the list, and I just feel like Brady Quinn is the most relatable when you start going down that list.
By the way, Tommy said that he could understand Steyer squared on 2 times speed. Do you ever listen to your podcasts on like 1.5 or 2 times speed? Do you ever do that?
Nope.
It drives me nuts. Even when it's like 1 1/4, I can't stand it. I don't like him talking. I don't like him talking too fast. It's like, go at my pace, go to real talking pace. I don't need this sped up stuff. But, I understand like Irish Breakdown with all the shows that we crank out every day. If you're going to try to listen to a good chunk of it, you might want to listen on 3 times speed or like just dial your brain into 3 times speed.
I think for Tommy, he starts the show a little bit late. So he feels that FOMO. Yeah. He feels the FOMO if he's not in the live crowd with everyone else.
Yep. He must be caught up right now because he knows we're talking about him and he just responded. Scale of 1 to 10. What's your confidence Notre Dame is in the playoff with an 11-1 finish to this season?
Oh, if Notre Dame finishes 11-1, they are a 10 out of 10 in the playoffs. I think there is no doubt. I think there's a couple things that help them. Losing that game early in the season compared to the end, you can get that taste out of a lot of people's mouth if you play really good football, the remaining 10 games and kind of prove everyone, hey, that was a one-off. That was a bad day. We were hungover off the Texas A&M win, yada, yada, yada. But when you start looking at, there's only a handful of undefeated teams left. And Notre Dame being who they are on the national level, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. The committee loves when Notre Dame is good because that means good ratings. That means people are going to the games. They're watching the games. So it's a win-win for both sides. Notre Dame just kind of has to hold up their end of the bargain, right? So I always felt that undefeated 100% got them in. I felt like one loss was about an 80% chance that they're getting in. And I felt like two losses, they really didn't stand a chance since they don't, belong in a conference. And given that their schedule isn't super taxing this season. But I'm willing to say now, 8 weeks into the season, considering where everyone else is at, I have no doubt in my mind that 11-1 gets them in the playoffs.
All right. Well, I'm like Jeff. I'm going to leave a little wiggle room. I'm going to call it a 9. I'm very confident. As Vince and I had a discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it last week, I was concerned. I still have some concern. And that's why, again, like Jeff Brown there, I'm leaving the wiggle room because there are some crazy things still to be played out in these other conferences, like the Big 12 and the Big 10 getting a lot of bids. It's going to be interesting to see exactly. Oh, DK says argument. Okay, well, we can go that direction as well. It's going to be interesting with Texas A&M, like how long this thing goes. Do they run the table in the SEC? I mean, that's almost unprecedented unless you're Alabama. And there were years, obviously, where even Alabama or Georgia being the other one more recently, I guess. But my point is only the elite of the elite in the SEC have run the table in the elite. Even when you win that conference, more times than not, you end up with one loss. So it's going to be, I'm curious to see exactly how long that A&M, sort of gravitational pull keeps going. Because to me, like we were talking about how big the Navy win was, like it was a good win. It was a quality win with some national people actually paying attention to it because Navy was also undefeated. But I think just as much as anything, Texas A&M beating LSU last week with their number 2 quarterback leading the comeback, like LSU said, hey, we didn't prepare for this guy doing, running and all this different stuff. I think that as much as anything is what's giving Notre Dame its real weight right now. And we do still have to see what happens when the college football playoff ranking comes out, because as great as things look in the AP and the coaches poll right now, they can still decide some different things. But that Texas A&M win, at least in the polls that we have right now, has carried a lot of weight. Notre Dame being able to beat Texas A&M with them being the last team in the SEC to be undefeated in the SEC. So I feel really good, but again, like I really want to see the crazy thing about Notre Dame right now. Again, like no one else, they have the most quality win probably in the country right now, but they also have the worst loss of anyone in the country right now. And that was my concern last week, is how that was going to be dealt with. And that's why I'm still 9 out of 10 right now, because everything looks good. But what happens if all these other teams in the Big 12, not everyone's playing each other in the Big 12. Not everyone's playing each other in the ACC. And there are a lot of things that can happen in the Big 10. So that's my only, it's that doubt, that concern is a lot smaller this week than last week, but it's still there a little bit, at least until we see the first playoff ranking.
So what I kind of would rebuttal to that is you have 5 automatic bids between your Power 4 conferences and then the group of 5, right? So that's 5 of 12 spots accounted for that Notre Dame definitely cannot touch. So that leaves 7 spaces left over after those 5 automatic bids. So what I would kind of go from there is, okay, let's just say that's 5. And then each Power 4 conference gets another one, right? So that gives you 4 more. So now you're up to 9 out of 12 spots kind of taken. I think that Notre Dame with 1 loss can still take up, hypothetically, those last 3 spots, even if every other conference gets another team ahead of Notre Dame. I think the real question is at 11-1, will they get slided in hosting a home game? I think that's maybe more of the discussion I would be willing to have is, at 11-1, do they view them as someone who gets to host a home game, or do they have to go on the road?
Well, like, I don't completely disagree with that, but again, like if you're gonna, like, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Right now, Iowa State and BYU are ranked behind Notre Dame, right? Well, one of those teams, at least theoretically, unless it ends up being Kansas State, but even Kansas State is ranked behind them. One of those teams is going to win the Big 12. So even though they're ranked behind Notre Dame right now, they're going to get one of the first 4 seeds. So because they're going to end up in that 1 through 4 bye slot. And so no matter what Notre Dame is ranked, they're going to get bumped down a spot automatically. So like whether you're talking about, do they get a 5 through 8 seed that would get them a first round game? If they're slotted in at number 8, they're going to get bumped down to number 9 and they're going to have to go on the road as opposed to getting that home game. And if they're number 11 or even number 12, depending on, if they were to struggle maybe against one of these remaining teams, they could theoretically get bumped down a spot or 2. So again, that's why I'm leaving a little bit of wiggle room out there right now, because there's a lot that's got to be played out, especially in the Big 12. So what's more impressive? Jeremiyah Love and Kyren Williams each scoring touchdowns in 9 straight games, or Dodgers first baseman Freddie Freeman with home runs in 5 consecutive World Series games.
This might break a lot of people's hearts, but having a home run in 5 straight World Series games, to me, is extremely harder than having, 9 touchdowns in 9 straight games. It would be the equivalent of if the Super Bowl was like a best of 7 and Kyren Williams was scoring a touchdown every game, right? And to kind of go a little bit further, Kyren Williams before this last week was playing in the offense with no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua. Like the whole offense was going through Kyren Williams basically, right? Like he was the guy that they were funneling touchdowns to because the rest of the roster was predominantly hurt in terms of kind of offensive star power. And then to go into Jeremiyah Love, it's still impressive. Like let me highlight or emphasize that as much as possible. It's still impressive what they're doing, but then, it's easier to do it at a college level for Jeremiyah Love than it is for Kyren Williams. And I think, they have a really good offensive line and a really good run game. So that helps Jeremiyah Love as well. The thing that I guess that makes Jeremiyah Love so impressive is I feel like every time he scores a touchdown, it's one of those like 50, 60-yard touchdowns, right? Like that's the impressive part that's coming from Jeremiyah. He's not just, bulldozing all those touchdowns in from the 1-yard line or the 2-yard line like Jalen Hurts does every freaking week. He's actually breaking off, explosive play type touchdowns, 20-plus yard touchdowns. But on the flip side of that, I mean, we're talking about the best of the best at the biggest stage, the World Series, 5 games straight. Like that's the definition of clutch, and especially that game 1 home run grand slam to walk things off. Like that's just remarkable at the end of the day.
It's hard enough just to get on base in 5 straight World Series games, let alone get a hit in 5 straight World Series games, let alone get a home run in 5 straight World Series games. And like the grand slam at the end of game 1 has swung the entire series.
Yeah.
Like they might ultimately, and very similar to, like the whole Kirk Gibson connection. We were talking about the call, She Is Gone that Joe Davis used that mimicked Vin Scully's call. the Dodgers in 88 were such big underdogs to the Oakland A's. They were, like the Bash brothers, and they had Dennis Eckersley, who was like the Mariano Rivera of that era. Like no one was touching Eck, and like Gibson is just up there fouling off ball after ball. And ultimately that home run, that at bat swung the entire series and led to them upsetting them. And like, this would not be quite as big an upset, but the fact that the Yankees had Garrett Cole, who is, to me, inarguably the best pitcher for either team in this World Series. Now the home run didn't come
His
off him,
postseason stats
but he
are
started,
nuts,
but he started game one, and for them to have the lead in that game after Garrett Cole pitched and to end up losing that, it could swing the entire series. Yeah, and having the bad ankle to boot, as Spark 5219 says.
I mean, Garrett Cole is 11-6 in the playoffs with a 2.9 ERA, right? So the fact that they stole that game from them was incredible. And everyone's bringing up the ankle, but he also, before this World Series or the playoffs even started, Freddie Freeman had a lot going on in his personal life. His son was really sick, and he had to kind of take a leave of absence for a couple of weeks. His ankle was bum, and he had kind of a track record of not hitting well in the playoffs, right? And so all of that kind of flipped when now he's got a 5-game, home run streak in World Series games alone. But I would just say that, to me, on a professional level, it is harder to hit a home run than it is to score a touchdown. And then you also put, that it's the World Series, it's the best of the best, the biggest stage. I just think it's no doubt, Freddie Freeman and his home runs. And I hope he does it again tonight because, I picked the Yankees to win the series, but I'd love nothing more to see the Yankees get swept and lose the World Series.
No doubt. The Yankees have just looked very lackluster so far. Now, I want to go back to the playoff talk that we were talking about because, like Tommy points out, theoretically, the group of 5 team could get one of those top 4 spots. That's true because the top 4 seeds in the first round buys go to the highest ranked conference champions. And so that includes SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and then whatever, the highest ranked group of 5. So if the highest ranked group of 5 is ahead of any of those other conferences in terms of the rankings going into the playoff, then they would get one of those top 4 seeds. But I would just say this, because you're trying to use that as an argument. It feels like that could help Notre Dame. But let's look at the rankings, right? And again, a lot can change. And the actual college football playoff rankings have not come out yet. But as of right now, the 2 best teams in the Big 12, BYU and Iowa State, are ranked behind Notre Dame. Georgia has 1 loss. They're ranked number 2. But Texas A&M, the only SEC team without a loss so far, is ranked behind Notre Dame. Clemson, now Miami is number 5 because they're undefeated. Clemson, their only loss, of course, is to Georgia, but they're behind Notre Dame. So just use those as an example. And Boise State is also sitting down at number 14. So you have the ACC, the SEC, basically the Big 12, and the group of 4. So theoretically, you've got 4 different conferences. It probably 3 because, one of those, like you've got the Big 10 in there as an example with all of their best teams ranked ahead of Notre Dame right now. But my point is, in theory, you could have 3 of those, 3 teams from those conferences leap ahead of Notre Dame. And if that happens, even if it's just 2, then that pushes Notre Dame down 2 spots. If it's 3 that move ahead of Notre Dame, that pushes Notre Dame down and, everybody else 3 spots as well in terms of what the seeding is going to be. So, again, that's why I think that has to be some wiggle room in there because all those teams are going to play conference championship games. And if you have a couple of upsets in those conference championship games, like if I were putting them on a neutral field right now, Clemson's ranked behind Notre Dame. They're playing Miami. I would pick Clemson to beat Miami. They're not going to play in the regular season. They're going to play most likely in the ACC championship game. So does all that make sense? Like, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, there's 2 things you should ultimately be rooting for. SEC, Texas A&M winning the SEC championship. That's what you should root for first and foremost. And then second of all, basically what you want is you want all the undefeated teams to remain undefeated, or you don't want basically a one-loss team beating an undefeated team.
You don't want big upsets right now.
Right,
Yeah.
because then you got two teams that have one loss and their only loss came in a conference championship, right? So the more you can get away from worst case scenario is like a 10-2 team winning a conference championship, right? Because then now you've got to put them in, and then you're likely going to put in the 11-1 team whose only loss was that conference championship.
Right.
That
Good
is the
Steelers.
worst case scenario. You don't want underdogs with already 1 or 2 losses going in and winning conference championships from teams that have less losses, no losses or maybe 1 loss, because all that's going to do is hurt Notre Dame, because now a team that's theoretically lower than Notre Dame has to jump them because they won the conference championship, and a team that was already ahead of Notre Dame that maybe lost the conference championship that only has 1 loss now is likely still going to stay ahead of Notre Dame because they too have 1 loss, and their only loss came in a conference championship. And we all know Notre Dame can't be in a conference championship. So those are the things I think you have to root for.
Andy Saylor, I think I would disagree with this. He said it would help if Louisville wins the ACC and Army or Navy the AAC. I mean, Army or Navy the AAC.
Louisville would replace Notre Dame with like 3 losses. That's kind of what I was just getting into. You don't want a multiple loss team winning conference championships.
Right. You like if Louisville were to I don't think Louisville's getting into the ACC championship game, but if somehow they would, and they beat Clemson or Miami, and Clemson, and let's say it's Miami, because let's assume Miami goes in undefeated as the example. Well, a 1-loss Miami team that it's sitting there ranked they're 5th or 6th right now. Yeah, they're ranked number 5. A 1-loss Miami team is going to get in. That's exactly what you're talking about. Like the multi-loss team winning those conference championship games does not help.
That hurts
Notre
them
Dame
to the worst degree.
Yeah, exactly. Because now you're stealing bids. So, G baby, I mentioned Pitt in there. I mean, I gave them a second of my time. They're undefeated. Do I think they're going to end up being undefeated? Absolutely not. I don't.
There's a couple undefeated. I mean, Pitt still has to play.
But they would be in this conversation as well as teams currently ranked behind Notre Dame. That would leapfrog them. They have SMU coming up this week. Then they've got Virginia, Clemson, Louisville, Boston College. I think that they lose to either SMU or Clemson.
There's a lot of, not a lot of.
They could run the table, but they haven't played anybody yet.
There's just, not to get too deep into this, but out of the undefeated teams, I feel like Penn State really hasn't played anyone, and that will change because they're going to play Ohio State coming up here soon. I feel like Miami really hasn't played anyone. BYU, Iowa State, I'm not too high on. IU, yes, it's fun, but they still have,
Ohio State.
There's some of these undefeated teams, Pittsburgh, Army. Yes, you're undefeated, but I really feel like you haven't played anyone yet. And that's the biggest strength that Notre Dame has, is they've beaten Texas A&M. They beat a Louisville team that was ranked. They beat a Navy team that was undefeated. Army is still undefeated. Georgia Tech is a quality win. Teams that at least were, ranked going into the Notre Dame game. And, quality wins for me at the end of the year. Are you above 500? Are you bowl eligible? Those are quality wins to me for, teams that fall outside of the top 25 at the end of the season. And I really feel like, again, Miami, Pittsburgh, IU, Penn State, they haven't really been battle tested yet, like a real strong, legit opponent.
But that's what's going on in both the ACC and the Big 12, because they've expanded these conferences and not everybody is playing each other as a result. And so you've got a lot of these teams that are sitting there with pretty good records, because like Josh is saying, well, I'm curious what happens if SMU, Clemson, and Miami all end up undefeated in conference play. Well, I think typically the first tiebreaker would be, since none of those teams obviously would have played each other, most of these conferences just go by the two highest ranked teams get in the conference championship game. But then, like, let's say BYU ends up winning the Big 12. Well, SMU's only loss right now is to BYU. So could SMU end up in the college football playoff, even if they, didn't end up in the conference championship game?
And I think that's what is going to have to come down to ultimately seeing, this is the first time the committee has done this 12-man format. So we don't know what what they're going to be leaning towards, right? Like, will they favor a one-loss, Big Ten team over a one-loss Notre Dame at the end of the day, or, a one-loss Notre Dame team or a one-loss Big 12 team? This first rankings will give us some understanding, which I'm not going to put much weight into because all the ones I care about are at the end of the season when all the games are over. But that'll give us the precedent moving forward of what we can expect with the new 12-team format.
Here's the other thing as well, that and this is where I think Vince and I started mixing it up last week, is the SEC and the Big Ten have come out and publicly said, I mean, if not threatened, like what they try to get in the next college football playoff contract in terms, like there's all this talk about already expanding to 14 and, guaranteed slots for the SEC in the Big Ten. They each think they deserve 4 bids every year. So regardless of what the
Big Ten's
SEC,
not that good. The SEC I could maybe get along with.
Yeah, but the Big Ten thinks that that's where they are. But you can also make, as of right now, you can make a good case for 4 teams. And again, they're not all going to play each other. There's a very real chance that you have 1 undefeated Big Ten teams and 3 Big Ten teams with just 1 loss going into those selections. So you could easily see 4. Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana would be in that mix as well. I put up 5, but obviously it's 4. But then so you've got those, and then regardless of what the SEC right now compared to the other 3 Power 4 conferences, the SEC is the only conference where you actually have multiple good teams playing each other this year. For the most part, in these other conferences, like you play maybe one other good team and you're playing a bunch of powder puffs and everybody's got a nice looking record at the end of the season.
So it was funny because I have some IU friends, and naturally, all of them are, we're undefeated, should be ahead of Notre Dame. And it's like, okay, go look at your schedule. Your best win is against Nebraska.
Yeah.
And I get it. You still have Ohio State, Michigan State, Purdue to finish off your season. But outside of Nebraska, IU hasn't beaten anyone over a 500 record.
Right.
Like, what are we talking about right now?
But they've never trailed this season, and they're beating everybody by double figures. And they're Indiana, which has kept them down to this point because they're Indiana. I mean, if you attached, like Notre Dame or, pick your name brand, football program, if you attach that name, a 7-0 team would be in the top 4 with that record. Right.
So everyone wants to see IU beat Ohio State, but I don't know if IU runs the table and wins the Big Ten. I think that just means more trouble for Notre Dame, because now you've got, 1 loss Oregon, you've got 1 loss or potentially like 2 loss Ohio State. Like, there's just a lot of favorability, I feel like, towards that conference, right? And IU kind of stealing one of those bids and going undefeated. And I don't think that's what you want as a Notre Dame fan.
I mean, I agree with Corey. He says he doesn't think there should be guaranteed spots. I don't either, but and most other people don't. But this is the power that the SEC and the Big Ten, they're basically trying to sling their junk around and say, we're the big boys and you got to do what we want. If you don't, we're going to go take our ball and go someplace else. They're just trying to throw their power around. It's a power move is what it is. But I agree. I mean, I think worst case, they're each going to get probably 3 teams in every year. You can't be satisfied with 3 teams in a 12-team playoff or even a 14-team field. I don't know. So Notre Dame women's basketball hosts Davenport in its exhibition game tomorrow night. Which is more likely to happen? The Irish break 100 points, they win by 50, both happen, or neither happen?
I think that it's most likely that both happen. I think they're going to score over 100, and I definitely think they're going to win by 50. If I had to pick which one would be harder, I think getting to 100 might be a little bit harder, but I definitely think they win by 50, and I definitely think they get to 100 as long as Neil doesn't – I mean, because she's still going to put reserves in. It's just a matter of if she dials it back with the reserves or if she actually lets them kind of run the full offense and try to score points, which I'm all on board for, by the way. You still have a bench to develop. You still have – I mean, seriously, look at what happened to them last year in terms of injuries. You have to have people ready to go regardless of if they're the starter or not, and you have to be in that mentality of I'm a starter and I'm competing for, potential starter minutes. So I have no problem when teams run it up in exhibition games.
No, and I mean they've got obviously Miles is the biggest name coming back from injury, but they've also got Kassan Prosper, Emma Risch, who are both injured for good chunks of last year. They're both going to be there, and like you've got all like just a full roster of players that's like heavy talent. It's like I don't see there's any way they're not going to break 100 points. And I don't think there's any way they're not going to win by 50. I was looking, 2 of the last 3 exhibition games, they have done both. They have won by 50 and broken 100. And this team that they're going to play tomorrow night, Davenport, they're a Division II, and they're not a very good Division II. They were a sub-500 Division II team last year. So this is all about Notre Dame and just going out there and letting them eat tomorrow night. So I think they're going to end up with both. So Chicago Bears head coach Matt Eberflus defended the decision to concede a 13-yard sideline pass, the play before Washington's game-winning 52-yard touchdown pass with no time on the clock Sunday. Washington was at its own 35, and they moved to the 48 thanks to the extra 13 yards they got on the pass, and they still had 2 seconds left. Here's what Matt Eberflus said about that. He said, quote, "You're defending the touchdown there, and them throwing the ball for 13 yards or 10 yards, whatever that is, doesn't really matter. It's always going to come down to that last play," end quote. And Jesse, Eberflus's explanation is blank.
Eberflus's explanation is completely idiotic. There is a small list of NFL quarterbacks who can throw a football 65 yards on their own 35 and score a touchdown, right? And you can't tell me that there's some crazy trick play, hook and ladder, whatever, that's going to score. You're just simply not scoring a touchdown from the 35-yard line, right? And even from midfield, you shouldn't score a touchdown. But your odds are considerably larger from the 50-yard line than they are from your own 35-yard line, right? Like that is a play that sets you up and gives you a chance. Even if that chance is 5%, it's still better than the probably 0% that you have on your own 35-yard line. And so it is just completely idiotic to believe that they were going to score a touchdown on their own 35. The only reason they ran that play is to give them a better shot at the end for, again, another miracle to essentially happen, right? But you at least have a shot at a miracle if you can get the ball to the 50-yard line. So, and let's also consider who's throwing the football, the guy with a punctured rib.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to say. He's
got
cracked ribs. And even when they got it at the 48, he still had to drop back and run all over the place. And then even when he chucked it, I don't know how far the ball was. It still didn't make it to the end zone. Yeah, it was like 5 to 7 yards short. In real time, like anyone bagging on Tony Romo that he doesn't know his stuff. I don't know if you were watching or paid attention. In real time, before that play, Tony Romo said, "This is what you need to be watching for if you're the Chicago Bears. You're not trying to go for it all right here. You're just trying to get it 10 or 12 yards, get it out of bounds, stop the clock real quick, have a little bit of time to give yourself one play, and then on the next play, you throw for the end zone." And that is exactly what Washington did. And, like you can talk about the way they defended it and, the idiot Stevenson over there, like John with the crowd and then showing up, late to the play and ultimately deflecting the ball to Noah Brown, but complete nonsense from Matt Eberflus. I have said all along that this is not an NFL head coach, and that's the explanation that he gave after that play.
That kind of leads me into my next question. I was listening to a segment with Dan Patrick, I think either yesterday or the day before. No, it had to be yesterday. He said he would have fired Eberflus on the spot after the game. Would you have done that?
Say that?
Yeah.
He's a defensive coach. Like, I don't know if I would have fired him on the spot, but I think he's coaching for his job the rest of the way. And it's not going to get any easier for the Bears. And that's a win that you should have walked out of there. As ugly as that game was, that's a win that you had to walk out of there with. And, like Vince and I were going back and forth yesterday, and he's talking about, well, Jaden Daniels playing better than Caleb Williams because, of course, he hates Caleb Williams. The difference in Washington.
They have Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. The difference in those two teams is the coaching that they are receiving. They both have rookie quarterbacks. And the difference is because Washington has not been good forever. And Dan Quinn in year one, he hasn't playing like a completely different team. And, Kingsbury is obviously part of it as well. I texted you the other day, like, how does Washington have all these electric playmakers all of a sudden? Because it's
the same roster.
Yeah, it's the same roster as last year, but they're just guys out there making plays left and right.
Who did they drafted Brian Thomas Jr., I think, right? That's him and Terry McLaurin, and then you got Zach Ertz at tight end. Their defense was really bad last year. I think you can make the argument that Caleb Williams has more on offense than Jaden Daniels does. And to me, again, what that comes down to is better coaching, better execution, and better kind of play creativity on the behalf of Cliff Kingsbury. So, and let's not forget who won the Heisman last year too, right? Like Jaden Daniels did win the Heisman over Caleb Williams. So I think those guys are neck and neck at the end of the day. And when you see a difference in performance like we're seeing right now, it has to come down to coaching, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. DK asked how Romo got so smart after playing.
He was always good. He just played on crappy Cowboys teams.
You say everybody gets smart after.
Well, and wouldn't you agree? And this is, maybe. Not even maybe. Someone's going to have something to say about this.
Are we going to go down a rabbit hole here?
Well, the Cowboys during the Tony Romo era would have been so much worse off without Tony Romo. Those were teams that were consistently 8-8, 9-7, and they would have been 4 or 5 win teams.
They didn't have offensive lines. They didn't have 1,000-yard rushers. They had no defense. They would have been abysmal if he hadn't. He carried them. For whatever you want to blame Romo for, he carried those teams. It was like basically him and Terrell Owens, then him and Des Bryant. But there were times when, the number 2
Jason
options
Witten.
Were just, Jason Witten as well. But
if you would have gave Romo the offensive line that Dak had at the beginning of his career, coupled with that,
well, and they were building
seasons of good defenses.
That's why they were, Zach Martin was supposed to be the last piece, basically to keep Tony Romo on his feet. They were going to run the ball and have Tony Romo, and then he broke his back, and that was it.
Yeah. Guy just couldn't stay healthy at the end. It was really sad because he took so many hits trying to make something of nothing for so many years, and then finally he starts to get a couple pieces, and then, a couple hits, and he's done.
Yep. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Colts head coach Shane Steichen says they're evaluating whether or not Anthony Richardson will start this week after he took himself out of the game after a fourth quarter run Sunday against Houston because he was winded and tired.
It's extremely weak. It's a cop-out. It's are you
saying Richardson is a cop-out or Steichen?
No.
saying that they're evaluating it. Okay.
So I saw
you're just saying
today,
they should bench him. You think they should just keep him on the bench and move on?
No. I saw that Joe Flacco was officially named the starter after you kind of sent me this rapid fire
really?
question.
I haven't seen this yet.
So what I'm saying is
you should have said something.
Well, that's why I said it now. I think it's incredibly soft that they're using this as a kind of scapegoat or rationale to bench Richardson. So first of all, let's get into him checking himself out of the game. I mean, when you're asking a quarterback to basically be a running back and a quarterback all in one, I don't think it's I don't think there's something wrong with the guy tapping his helmet and saying, Coach, I'm not what's going to give us the best opportunity on this play. Let me come out. Because how many times do you see wide receivers, running backs, linebackers, DBs tapping out?
But he's the quarterback. That's the guy everyone is looking to for leadership.
I don't care. You're still asking him to play running back at the end of the day. It's not anymore where quarterbacks are just dropping back and throwing the ball. These guys have to run all over the field. And so I just think if you're going to bench him, don't use the excuse, well, we're evaluating it because he checked himself out of the game. Just say he's been abysmal as a starter and Joe Flacco gives you the better chance of winning. Stop hiding behind this excuse all of a sudden that,
I can live with that.
He's winded or he's tired and all these things. Well, again, I would rather my quarterback check out for a play than take a bad sack and fumble or throw an interception because he's fatigued.
It's week 8 and he knows that's his game. I can't get behind. I can't get behind that. You're the quarterback. You rest. You rest after the punt. You rest after the touchdown. That's when you rest. You got to stay.
Yeah, but that's only applicable to quarterbacks. Any other guy can check out when they want.
Yeah, I agree. With
I
that.
just
You don't see Riley Leonard tapping out after he runs for 20 yards.
Well, I mean, he got the wind knocked out of him, and he's had to come out of the game before.
That was different. That was an actual injury. He didn't ask out.
My problem is quarterback used to be the least mobile position in the entire sport. But when you ask guys to be dual threat quarterbacks and you ask them to be a quarterback and a running back, I don't find anything wrong with the guy saying, I am winded and I am not going to be able to give you the best of myself on this play. 20 years ago, I would completely agree with you. But in the age of dual threat quarterbacks, when you're asking them to run as much as they are, I don't think it's unfair to say, Coach, I'm winded this play and then come back in the next play. It's not like he took a whole drive off. It's not like he took a whole series off. Took one play off and he was ready to go. I don't see anything wrong with a guy when they're asking him to run the way that they do.
I agree more with your other point of it is a cop-out. They completely whiffed on Richardson. He missed most of last season with injury, but he's a running back playing quarterback. That's what he is. He does not read defenses well. He does not throw the ball with any, semblance.
I mean, he had the traits. He wasn't an actual proven quarterback.
Yeah, but they took him high in the first round, and there were some questions about him. And Steichen, I think that there was a lot of trust placed in Steichen because he just came from Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts, essentially turned Jalen Hurts into the kind of quarterback, even though Hurts, his own issues throwing the ball in college, he was much better at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, by the way. He was much better there throwing the football than he was when he was at Alabama. But I think it's a massive cop-out on their part. I think that they completely whiffed on drafting Richardson and now to go to Joe Flacco.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Just hiding behind, you're benching him now and hiding behind this whole he's checking himself out of the game. Say he's got a career completion percentage of 44% and move on.
Right.
This wasn't this could be your quote unquote final nail in the coffin, but you were looking for this final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's the part that really rubs me the wrong way. We can disagree about, whether or not he should have checked himself in or out because he was tired, but to now bench him solely because of this reason, I can't buy that. I can't buy that. You just come out. We whiffed. We took him too high. He wasn't ready. Now we got to bench him and let Joe Flacco play. That's the more appropriate response.
I don't disagree with that. We're going to wrap it up with that. I think it is you and Vince tomorrow. Does that sound right?
Well, you're not going to be here.
That's correct.
And
That's
it's
why
Vince's usual day. So I guess that means
the spreadsheet, I believe, has your name on it. I don't know if you've
Does
ever
it?
checked that. Yeah, you might want to check with Vincenzo and make sure. But I will
open
not
it
be
right
here
now
tomorrow
and give
because
you a
I'll-
definite answer.
because I'll be, well, you're not going to get a definite response that quickly. But yeah, so I'll be doing basketball tomorrow. Hopefully there's a show tomorrow. It might involve Jesse.
Oh, I'm on the spreadsheet. I'll be here.
All right, there you go. I would touch base with your boy Vinny. Talk to him. It's a mailbag show. You'll have a lot of fun. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks again to Hannah Hidalgo, our guest earlier on the show. Women's basketball tomorrow. I'll be back on Thursday. Jesse and I will be back for some we in, we out. So got that going for you. All
Enjoy
right.
the bye week. Recover. 4 games left.
Salty, or not salty, but DK just coming in with haymakers left and right. Jesse and Trevor, 50% awkward silence. Hit the like button before you leave, and we'll talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.